Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let us return to our main character. It was raining, the kind of steady, cold rain that makes every sound feel heavier. I remember the drip against the kitchen window and the reflection of the chandelier trembling in the puddles on the floor. Ethan was standing near the island, hands gripping the edge of the counter, his voice trembling but sharp. He said I needed to apologize to his wife or pack my things and leave. For a moment, I thought I had misheard him. My son, the boy I had raised to speak calmly, to think before he acted, was now glaring at me as if I were a stranger who had wronged him. Behind him, Vanessa stood with her arms folded, her lips pressed into something that might have been a smile if it weren't for the triumph flickering in her eyes. I had always tried to be careful with her. She was polite in public, gracious when people were watching. But behind closed doors, her words carried the subtle sting of someone who believed she deserved more. Tonight, though, she wasn't subtle. She looked at me as if she had finally won. I asked quietly what I was supposed to apologize for. She tilted her head and said that I had embarrassed her in front of Oliver, my grandson. Apparently, I had told her not to scold him so harshly for spilling his juice on the table. I had said he was just a child, and that a mess could be cleaned up. That was my crime. Ethan's voice rose. He said I had no right to interfere with how they raised their son, that my old ways didn't belong in their home. He said I was making Vanessa uncomfortable. I tried to keep my voice steady. I told him I hadn't meant to interfere, that I only wanted peace in the house. But my words sounded small, swallowed by the sound of rain. Oliver sat on the couch, his legs swinging. He looked from his mother to me, then down at his hands. I caught his eyes for a second, and he looked away. That was when something in my chest broke, quiet but final. Vanessa leaned against the wall, crossing one leg over the other. "You can stay," she said, "if you can learn some respect." The way she said respect made it sound like submission. Ethan repeated it. "Apologize, Dad. Or get out." The kitchen light flickered once. The smell of rain and wet soil drifted in through the back door. I looked at my son. He had his mother's jawline, his mother's temper too. I had always thought he inherited my patience, but I could see now that it had vanished somewhere between his ambition and his pride. I said nothing for a long time. Then I nodded. I walked down the hall to the guest room where I had been staying since my retirement. The house felt foreign, even though I had helped design it. The pictures on the wall were mostly of Oliver. Smiling, growing, living a life that I was slowly being erased from. On the dresser sat a photo from Ethan's college graduation. I had been younger, stronger, proud beyond words. I stared at it until the image blurred. I opened my suitcase. It wasn't large, but it was enough for what I needed. A few shirts, my old leather journal, and a framed picture of Ethan when he was 6, holding the paper airplane we built together. I had once told him that even small things could fly if made with care. I tucked the photo face down between my clothes. When I returned to the hallway, Vanessa was whispering something to Ethan. Her voice dropped as I approached. Ethan looked up at me, jaw clenched, but he didn't speak. I said quietly that I would leave that night. Vanessa shrugged. "Do what you need to do," she said. Her tone made it clear that she believed she had finally rid the house of its last inconvenience. Ethan's expression flickered for a second, but pride hardened it again. He said, "Maybe it's for the best." Oliver came out of his room, holding the small wooden plane I'd carved for him. He stood there silent, his eyes wide. I wanted to kneel to tell him I'd see him soon. But Vanessa's hand rested on his shoulder, pulling him gently back. She smiled at him, then looked at me with the kind of smile people use to seal a door. Outside, the rain had turned into a mist. I walked to the car, each step echoing on the wet pavement. My jacket clung to my shoulders heavy, and the streetlights painted long, thin shadows that followed me all the way to the end of the driveway. I put the suitcase in the trunk and sat behind the wheel for a while. Through the window, I could still see the faint glow of the living room. Their silhouettes moved around small against the light. I thought of the years I'd spent building a company, a home, a life that was supposed to protect them. Somehow that life had turned into a cage where respect had become a weapon. When I finally started the car, I saw Ethan in the doorway. For a moment, I hoped he would come out, say something that would make me stop. He didn't. He stood there, arms crossed, the outline of a man convinced he was right. I rolled down the window just enough to let the cold air in. It smelled like cedar and rain. "You're right," I said softly, knowing he couldn't hear me. "From now on, I won't interfere in your life." Then I drove away, the headlights cutting through the fog. The house grew smaller in the mirror until it disappeared completely. The road out of Seattle stretched ahead, dark and quiet. I didn't know where I was going, only that I couldn't stay. I kept thinking about the word respect and how strange it felt when demanded instead of earned. The rain eased. The hum of the tires filled the silence that had replaced everything else. I drove past the city limits, past the familiar streets, until only the sound of the engine kept me company. I didn't look back again. I used to believe that a man's worth was measured by what he built. For most of my life, that belief guided me like a compass. I built Lawson Aerotech from a rented garage outside Portland, with nothing but a second-hand computer, a small lathe, and a stubborn refusal to fail. 30 years later, when I sold the company in 2000, they called me a self-made success story. It was supposed to be the start of a peaceful retirement. After the sale, I set up the Lawson Family Trust. $8 million set aside for the next generation. I told Ethan it was my way of making sure the family would always be safe, that no one could touch what we'd earned. He nodded at the time, but I saw the question in his eyes. Why not give it directly to him? Why did I still need to control it? I didn't mean to control anything. I'd spent decades leading teams, signing contracts, deciding who to trust and who to let go. When you've lived that way for too long, it's hard to stop being careful. I thought I was protecting him. He thought I was still running the company, just under a new name family. The first cracks started small. One afternoon over dinner, he asked if he could invest part of the trust into a tech startup a friend of Vanessa's was launching. I told him the trust wasn't meant for speculation, that it was structured to provide stability, not risk. He looked at me like I had just called him a child. He said he wasn't asking for permission, only my blessing. I said the blessing would come when he earned it. Vanessa smiled, then a slow, deliberate smile that said she had been waiting for that moment. She poured herself another glass of wine and said, "Some people just can't retire from being the boss." I ignored her. It wasn't the first time she'd said something like that, and I had promised myself not to argue. But I could feel Ethan's pride shrinking beside her words. I didn't realize until later that every quiet comment she made in that tone planted a seed he would carry. At night, when the house was quiet, I'd sometimes hear them talking in the living room. Her voice low, his sharper. Once I caught my name between their whispers. I didn't need to hear the rest. I knew how resentment grows. It feeds on silence. I had learned that lesson long before. When I was young, my father lost everything in a failed construction deal. He refused to ask for help, even from his own brother. He said a man who loses control loses himself. I spent years trying not to become him, only to realize I had become a softer version of the same thing. One evening, I found a draft document on the shared family computer, Vanessa's laptop left open on the counter. It was a financial proposal, listing my assets' potential reallocations, and even the property in Seattle where we lived. At the bottom, a note read, "Pending Richard's consent. If not, we move forward without him." I closed the file and walked out to the porch. The sky was still blue, but it felt heavy. For the first time, I wondered if my silence had been mistaken for weakness. A few days later, I called Marcus Reed, my attorney. He was younger than me, sharp, the kind of man who saw 2 steps ahead in every conversation. We'd worked together for years, and I trusted him. I told him to review the trust again, tighten the protective clauses, make sure no one could alter it without direct authorization. He didn't ask why. He just said, "You think they'll try something?" "I think temptation has a way of testing love," I said. Marcus sighed. "Then let's make sure you pass the test before they even start it." When I hung up, I felt both relieved and ashamed. I shouldn't have needed to protect myself from my own son. Yet deep down, I knew it wasn't just him. Vanessa was clever. She understood money the way politicians understand applause. She didn't need to take it all at once. She only needed to shift control inch by inch. There was another moment that still echoes. It was Oliver's birthday. We gathered around the cake, the lights dimmed, and everyone sang. Vanessa leaned toward Ethan and whispered something. He laughed, but his eyes flicked toward me. Later, when Oliver opened my gift, a model airplane kit like the ones I used to build with Ethan, Vanessa said lightly, "That's adorable. But I'm not sure he'll have the patience for that kind of thing." Her voice was sweet, but the message was sharp. Oliver looked uncertain, as if he'd done something wrong by liking it. I wanted to tell her that patience was something boys learned from their fathers, not their screens. But I kept quiet. I told myself silence was maturity. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Ethan came to my room. He stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, eyes avoiding mine. He said Vanessa just wanted harmony in the house, that I needed to trust them to run their own lives. "I do trust you," I said. "Then stop checking the bills," he replied. I didn't answer. He turned and left before I could. The next morning, I walked past the garage and saw him arguing on the phone. His tone was sharp defensive. When he noticed me, he turned his back, pretending to adjust the car seat. It hit me then that he no longer saw me as a father. To him, I was an obstacle standing between his ambition and the illusion of freedom Vanessa promised him. I tried to believe it was temporary. Families fight, pride fades. But each week, the air in the house grew heavier, like a storm waiting for a single spark. Vanessa stopped greeting me in the mornings. Ethan started spending longer hours at work. Oliver spent more time in his room, earbuds in, lost in some world I didn't belong to. I found comfort in routine. Early mornings with coffee by the window, reading the paper, pretending everything was fine. But beneath the calm, something restless stirred. One Sunday, as I sat outside trimming the rose bushes, Vanessa came out with a glass of iced tea. She leaned on the railing and said, "You know it must be hard for you, letting go." I wiped my hands on a rag. "Of what control?" she said softly. It's like a habit for you, isn't it?" Her smile was polite, but her eyes dared me to answer. "I didn't." She added, "Ethan just wants to feel like a man in his own house. You could help him by stepping back a little." "I thought I already had," I said. She nodded slowly, turned and went back inside. The ice clinked against the glass as she walked away. I stood there long after she was gone, realizing she wasn't talking about helping Ethan. She was warning me. That night I couldn't sleep. The rain returned, tapping softly against the window, the same rhythm that would follow me out of that house a few weeks later. I thought about the word control again and how it changes shape depending on who's holding it. To me, it had meant responsibility. To them, it meant power. I looked around the room that had once felt like mine and saw nothing that belonged to me anymore. The framed photographs, the books, even the air felt borrowed. Somewhere between success and family dinners, I had lost the simple truth that not everyone wants the same kind of safety. Outside, the city lights flickered like distant embers. I closed my eyes and promised myself one thing. Whatever came next, I would not raise my voice. I would not defend my honor, and I would not beg to stay. I didn't know it then, but that promise would shape everything that followed. Dinner that evening started quietly enough. The smell of roasted chicken and rosemary filled the kitchen, the kind of scent that should have felt like home. But the air was already tense before we sat down. Vanessa set the plates with her usual precision, her bracelets chiming softly as she moved. Ethan scrolled through his phone, pretending not to notice how silent I'd become. I tried to keep things light. I asked Oliver how school was going. He brightened for a moment and said he'd joined the robotics club. I told him that was a great choice, that he'd learn more building things than just reading about them. He smiled, but before he could say more, Vanessa interrupted. Actually, she said, we've been talking about limiting his after-school activities until his grades improve. He needs structure. Her voice was smooth but sharp, like glass. I said that robotics was structure, that it taught focus and teamwork. She gave a small laugh. Richard, times have changed. Kids don't need to learn with their hands anymore. Everything's digital now. Ethan looked up just long enough to say, Vanessa's right. We know what's best for him. I felt a familiar heat rise in my chest, but swallowed it back. I didn't mean to interfere. I just thought it might help. Vanessa's smile didn't reach her eyes. You have a lot of opinions for someone who says he doesn't interfere. The rest of the dinner went quiet. The only sounds were the clink of cutlery and the faint hum of the refrigerator. Oliver's eyes darted between us like he was waiting for someone to break. I focused on cutting my food, even though I had no appetite. When the meal was done, I stood to clear the plates. Vanessa said sharply, "Leave them, I'll handle it." Her tone made it clear that I'd already done too much. I went to the porch for some air. The night was mild, but I could still feel the tension pressing against me like a wall. I could hear them talking inside, her voice low and deliberate, his rising in short bursts of frustration. Then after a while, silence again. That silence had become its own kind of noise. The next morning, I made coffee before anyone else woke up. The kitchen felt peaceful at that hour, just the soft drip of the machine and the smell of the roast. When Vanessa came in, she didn't say good morning. She went straight to the fridge, grabbed a bottle of water, and said, "We'd appreciate it if you didn't correct me in front of Oliver anymore. It confuses him." I nodded slowly. I didn't realize I was confusing anyone. "You were," she said, looking me dead in the eyes. "He needs consistency, and that means respecting how we do things." There was something in her tone, final, almost rehearsed. I could have argued, but I didn't. I just said, "Understood," and watched her leave. Later that day, Ethan came home early. He looked uneasy, pacing the living room. When I asked if everything was all right, he said, "Vanessa feels like you don't appreciate her." I said I appreciate her very much. I also think she mistakes boundaries for distance. He frowned. "You're judging her again." I took a deep breath. "Ethan, you're my son. You can make your own choices. But don't let someone convince you that respect only goes one way." He rubbed the back of his neck. "You're still trying to control things, even when you say you're not." That hit harder than I expected. I wanted to remind him of the nights I stayed up working, so he could have that college education, the years I gave to make sure he'd never have to worry about stability. But saying any of that would only make me sound defensive, and he wasn't ready to listen. The argument ended before it started. He went upstairs, and I sat on the couch staring at the dark TV screen, my own reflection staring back at me. That evening, Vanessa posted something online, a photo of the dining table set for 3, with a caption that read, "Peace is finally possible when old energy leaves the room." I wasn't tagged, but I didn't have to be. I knew exactly what she meant. I showed it to no one, said nothing, just closed my phone and sat there in the dim light. It was strange how a sentence could hurt more than a shout. The following weekend, we had guests, Vanessa's friends from her PR firm. They filled the house with laughter, wine, and the kind of conversation that excluded me without effort. I stayed mostly in the background, polite, smiling when someone acknowledged me. At one point, one of them asked how retirement felt. Before I could answer, Vanessa said lightly, "He's still adjusting. It's hard for some men to stop giving orders." The laughter was polite, but real. I felt something twist in my chest. I excused myself and went outside again. The laughter followed me through the glass door, muffled but sharp. Oliver came out after a few minutes. "Are you okay, Grandpa?" he asked. I smiled. "I'm fine, kiddo." He hesitated. "Mom says you don't like her." I looked at him carefully. "Your mom and I see things differently sometimes. That's all." He nodded slowly, not sure if he believed me. "I like when you're here," he said finally. I didn't know how to answer, so I just put my hand on his shoulder. That night, long after everyone had gone to bed, I sat at the kitchen table staring at my phone. I opened the photo of Oliver from his birthday, the one where he was holding the airplane kit I'd given him. He'd built it perfectly, every piece in place, the kind of patience you can't fake. I remembered Vanessa's voice that day, mocking in its sweetness and Ethan's quiet agreement. It was becoming clear that I wasn't part of the family anymore. I was a guest who'd overstayed his welcome. The next morning, I overheard them talking while making breakfast. Vanessa's voice was calm, almost cheerful. "He's just not happy here. It's uncomfortable for everyone." Ethan sighed. "What do you want me to do? Ask him to find his own place," she said. "He'll understand." I stood in the hallway, unseen. The smell of toast and coffee filled the air, ordinary and cruel all at once. I waited until I heard them leave for work, then went to my room and sat on the edge of the bed. There was no anger left, only a quiet certainty. I had tried silence, patience, compromise. None of it mattered. In their eyes, I was a relic, a reminder of a world that no longer fit theirs. I looked around the room one last time. The morning light came through the blinds in thin golden stripes. My suitcase sat open in the corner, still half packed from a business trip I never took years ago. It looked ready now. Before I started folding clothes, I checked the small wooden box in the drawer. Inside was my old fountain pen, the one I used to sign every contract of my career, the pen that had built the foundation of their comfort. I placed it in the suitcase on top of my shirts. By evening, I had made up my mind. I'd leave quietly with dignity. They could keep their peace and their pride. I would keep my silence. When I stepped outside that night, the air was cooler, soft, with the scent of pine. I looked up at the windows, light still glowing behind the curtains, and for the first time, I didn't feel like it was my home. It was just a house. Inside, Oliver's laughter carried faintly through the glass. I smiled, whispered a small goodbye he couldn't hear, and turned away. That was the night I began to understand that leaving wasn't surrender. It was self-respect. And soon it would lead me somewhere I never expected. The road from Seattle to Portland felt endless, though it was a drive I had made dozens of times when I was younger. This time it was different. The rain had stopped somewhere near Olympia, but the clouds still hung low, heavy, and gray. I kept my hands on the wheel, letting the hum of the tires drown out everything I didn't want to think about. When I finally crossed the city line, I realized I didn't have a plan. I just knew I couldn't go back. I parked in front of a small bookstore on Hawthorne Boulevard. The sign read, "Cooper's Corner," hand-painted in faded gold. Inside, through the glass, I saw her. Helen Cooper. She was arranging books on a shelf, her hair tied back in the same loose bun she'd worn 30 years ago when we worked side by side at the aerospace lab. I hadn't spoken to her in nearly a decade, not since she moved back to Portland to care for her father. But seeing her there felt almost inevitable, like some quiet thread of my life had been leading me to this moment. When she looked up and saw me through the window, she froze for half a second, then smiled soft, cautious, as if greeting a ghost. I pushed the door open, and the little bell above it chimed. "Well," she said, her voice warm but edged with surprise. "If it isn't the man who once swore he'd never retire." I smiled faintly. Guess I broke more promises than I thought. She looked at me for a long moment. "You look tired, Richard." "I am," I said simply. She motioned toward the back. "Come on, I close at 6. You can buy me coffee and tell me what dragged you back to Portland." The cafe next door was small, with the kind of dim yellow light that made everything feel softer. Helen ordered a cappuccino. I asked for black coffee. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind that comes from two people who already know each other's ghosts. When I told her what had happened, I expected pity. Instead, she listened quietly, her hands around her cup, eyes steady. When I finished, she said, "So they told you to leave?" "Pretty much." "And you did?" "Yes." She nodded once thoughtfully. "Good. That caught me off guard." "Good." Her mouth curved in a small smile. "You always thought standing your ground was strength. But sometimes, Richard, stepping back is the smarter move. It's not surrender. It's strategy." I stared at her, unsure if I wanted to laugh or argue. "You make it sound like a chess game." She sipped her coffee. "Isn't life always one?" The rain started again outside, tapping softly against the windows. For a moment, the years between us dissolved, and I saw the woman I used to know. The one who matched me line for line in every debate, who never let me get away with being right just because I was louder. We talked for hours. About old co-workers, about the company, about her father's passing, and the quiet life she'd built among the books. There was a steadiness to her I hadn't felt in years. A calm that made me realize how long I'd been living in noise. At one point she asked, "What do you want to do now?" I looked out the window. "I don't know. Maybe drive. See where the road takes me." Her eyes softened. "You always said you'd travel when you retired. Maybe it's time. I thought I'd travel with family," I admitted. "But I guess some journeys aren't meant to be shared." Helen leaned forward slightly. "Maybe. Or maybe you're supposed to meet new ones along the way." I smiled, not because I believed her, but because it was nice to hear hope spoken out loud. When we left the cafe, the air was crisp, washed clean by the rain. She locked the bookstore door and turned to me. "I have a spare room upstairs," she said matter-of-factly. "It's small, but it's warm. Stay a night. Figure out your next step." I wanted to refuse to insist I'd be fine in a motel, but I was too tired to pretend pride was worth the loneliness. One night I said. The room smelled faintly of cedar and old paper. There were stacks of novels on the dresser and a small vase of dried lavender on the windowsill. I sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the sound of the city, distant cars, muffled laughter from the street below, the slow creak of the old floorboards. It felt more like home than anywhere I'd been in months. Helen knocked on the door a while later, carrying a folded blanket. "You were always terrible at accepting help," she said, handing it to me. "I'm trying to improve. That's a start." She hesitated at the doorway. "You know, I used to think you were the most stubborn man alive. Still do, actually. But there was always a kindness underneath it. Don't let bitterness bury that." Her words landed deeper than I expected. "I'm not bitter," I said quietly. "Just disappointed." "That's the first stage," she replied, smiling faintly before turning to leave. Sleep well, Richard. When the light went out, I lay there staring at the ceiling. The rain had stopped again, leaving the night heavy with stillness. My mind replayed Ethan's face the way he had looked past me as I packed. I kept wondering if there was something I could have said to make him see reason, but every version of that conversation ended the same. Pride doesn't listen until silence speaks louder. At some point I drifted off, only to wake near dawn. The sky outside was a pale gray, the kind that promises both endings and beginnings. I walked downstairs and found Helen already up arranging books on a table display. She looked up when I entered, her expression gentle. "You're an early riser," she said. "Habit," I replied. "Hard to unlearn after 40 years of schedules." She handed me a cup of coffee. "So what will you do?" I looked around the shop, the rows of stories written by people who had survived their own storms, and said, "I think I'll drive south. Maybe to California. Maybe farther." She nodded as if she'd already expected that answer. "You'll find something out there," she said. "Or maybe you'll just find yourself again. Either way, it'll be worth it." I smiled. "You always did have the last word. Someone has to." We stood there for a moment, the quiet between us, thick but not heavy. Then she said, "If you ever need a place to rest, you know where to find me." "I do," I said. "And Helen, yes, thank you for not asking me to fight back." She studied me for a moment, then nodded. "You don't need to fight to win, Richard. Sometimes letting time do the talking is the best revenge." I left shortly after sunrise. The roads were empty, the air fresh from the night's rain. As I drove away from Portland, I looked in the rearview mirror one last time. The bookstore faded into the distance, a small square of gold against the gray. I didn't know where I was headed, only that for the first time in years, the silence around me didn't feel like punishment. It felt like peace, waiting to become purpose. The hills of Tuscany looked like something out of a painting I'd once seen hanging in an airport lounge, the kind you glance at for a second and think you understand. But living inside it was different. The air was sweeter there, heavy with olive and earth, the sound of cicadas humming in the distance. I rented a small stone house outside Siena, tucked between a vineyard and a row of cypress trees. It was quiet enough that I could hear my own heartbeat at night. The owner, a widower named Carlo, handed me the keys and said in broken English, "Here time moves slowly. People too." He smiled like it was both a blessing and a warning. The first few days I kept myself busy fixing small things that didn't need fixing. A loose shutter, a squeaky hinge, an uneven step by the garden path. The habit of work was still in me, stitched into every breath. But at night, when the air cooled and the wind carried the smell of crushed grapes, I began to feel something I hadn't in years. Stillness. I'd sit on the porch with a notebook and a glass of Chianti, writing down thoughts that made no sense at all. I wasn't trying to make sense of anything yet. I just needed to put the noise somewhere outside of me. Sometimes I'd sketch the horizon or jot down the names of places I wanted to see next. Rome, Lake Como, maybe Athens if I had the nerve. Helen called every few days, sometimes just to ask if I was eating enough, sometimes to tell me about a book that reminded her of me. Once she said, "I'm proud of you." I didn't know what to say to that, so I changed the subject. But I kept thinking about it long after we hung up. On the 5th morning, I drove into town for groceries. The streets were narrow and uneven, lined with small cafes and faded yellow buildings. At the market, an old woman tried to sell me figs, chattering too fast for me to understand. I bought them anyway, mostly for her smile. When I got back to the house, a new email was waiting on my phone. The sender was Marcus Reed. Subject: possible breach of trust access. I opened it, and the air seemed to tighten around me. He wrote, "Someone attempted to file an authorization request using your digital signature." The system flagged it as inconsistent with your previous verifications. I halted the process immediately. For a few seconds, I just stared at the screen. My hand was steady, but my pulse wasn't. I read the line again, slower this time, making sure I hadn't misunderstood. Someone had tried to access the Lawson family trust. I called Marcus right away. He answered on the first ring. "I was going to call you," he said. "It's exactly what we feared." "Who was it?" I asked. He hesitated. "The request came through Ethan's account, but the metadata shows a different IP address. My guess is Vanessa handled it." I leaned back in the chair, the sound of cicadas buzzing faintly through the open window. "So she forged my authorization?" "Not exactly," he said. "She used a scanned version of your signature and tried to embed it into a legal request for transfer of trustee oversight. It's clever, but sloppy. I've already frozen all access points until we can verify everything." "Freeze them all," I said. "Every linked account, every subsidiary transfer." Marcus paused. "Are you sure you want to go that far? It'll shut down their personal accounts too." I looked out at the vineyard rows of green stretching endlessly under the sun. "Yes. Leave them as they are." He didn't argue. Understood. After I hung up, I sat there for a long while, staring at nothing. I thought of Ethan signing whatever Vanessa put in front of him, believing she knew best. I imagined her rehearsed calm as she told him it was just paperwork that his father would never notice. It wasn't anger I felt. Not yet. It was something colder, like the air before a storm. That evening I walked into town again, not because I needed anything, but because I couldn't stay still. The bell tower in the piazza rang 7 times, and I found myself sitting outside a small cafe. The waiter brought me espresso without me asking for it. I guess I looked like the kind of man who needed one. I thought about all the years I'd spent protecting what I'd built, believing it was for family. And now the people I'd built it for were trying to dismantle it piece by piece. When I got back to the house, the sun was setting behind the hills, casting everything in gold. I poured myself another glass of wine and opened my notebook. I wrote only one line: "Revenge is not anger. It is arithmetic." The next morning, Marcus sent another email confirming that the freeze had gone through. All financial movements under the Lawson family trust were temporarily disabled. "They'll find out soon," he wrote. "I expect you'll be hearing from them." He was right. By afternoon, my phone was vibrating non-stop. Missed calls from Ethan, texts from numbers I didn't recognize. One from Vanessa that said only, "You're making a mistake." I didn't answer any of them. I went outside instead, walking through the vineyard as the wind brushed against the vines. Somewhere in the distance, a farmer was singing. The tune was foreign, but it felt familiar in its loneliness. Helen called that night. "You sound different," she said. "Maybe I am," I said. "Did something happen? Let's just say a line was crossed, and I decided not to step back this time." Her voice softened. "Be careful, Richard. You've spent your whole life protecting things. Don't lose yourself trying to protect your pride." I smiled faintly. "It's not pride, it's math. You take something from me. I take back what was never yours." There was a pause. Then she said, "Just promise me you won't let it turn you bitter." I promised nothing. I said quietly, though there was no anger in it. When the call ended, I stepped outside again. The stars were out sharp and countless. I hadn't seen a sky like that since I was a boy. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt steady. I wasn't lost anymore. The next morning, I woke to a message from Marcus confirming that the trust was secure and that he had triggered the legal protections to prevent any future access without in-person verification. I replied with 2 words, "Good work." Then, I sat down, opened my notebook, and began to plan my next move. I didn't know exactly what it would be yet, but I knew this much silence would be my weapon, patience, my strategy. The vineyard outside swayed gently in the morning light. I took a sip of coffee, the bitterness grounding me. For the first time since I'd left home, I wasn't running anymore. I was waiting, and soon they would understand what waiting could cost. The message from Marcus arrived just after dawn. I had barely finished my first cup of coffee when I saw his name flash on the screen. The subject line read, "They moved again." I opened it slowly, half expecting it. Vanessa had filed a secondary request to access the trust, this time using a different submission channel, one that involved a notary and a local bank manager. The document had Ethan's signature, again identical to the one Marcus had already flagged. She was persistent. I had to give her that. I called Marcus right away. "She's doubling down," he said. "They tried to reroute access through the domestic trust liaison. It's a desperate move. What happens now, I've activated the fraud prevention clause. Every account connected to their household, joint, or individual will be suspended until we verify the signatures. So they're locked out completely. Temporarily, yes. You gave me full discretion to protect the trust, and I'm exercising it." "Good," I said. My voice was calm, almost too calm. "Richard, this will hurt them financially," Marcus said carefully. "Mortgages, credit lines, personal accounts, everything freezes." "You sure you want to go that far?" I looked out at the Tuscan hills, the morning fog clinging to the vines like smoke. "Marcus, I didn't start this." He didn't argue. "Then I'll send the confirmation papers." When the call ended, I put the phone down and stared at the vineyard below. The silence was heavy, but it wasn't guilt that weighed on me. It was the strange satisfaction of order being restored. Vanessa thought she was clever enough to manipulate the system, but she had forgotten one thing: I had designed that system. Every clause, every condition, every safeguard was mine. Around noon, I got the first text from Ethan. "What did you do?" Then another. "Dad, we can't access anything. Vanessa says you froze our accounts. Tell me that's not true." A third message followed 5 minutes later. "Are you punishing me?" I didn't reply. An hour later, Marcus sent a brief confirmation. "All assets secured, unauthorized access blocked. Proceeding with standard fraud notice." I leaned back in my chair, exhaled slowly, and closed my eyes. The faint hum of cicadas outside the open window felt almost like applause. By evening, the phone had gone from buzzing to ringing non-stop. Ethan's calls, Vanessa's messages, even one from a mutual friend trying to mediate. I turned the phone face down and walked outside. The sun was sinking behind the hills, turning everything gold and soft. The smell of baked earth and grape leaves filled the air. Somewhere nearby, a farmer shouted something cheerful in Italian. I envied his simplicity. Later that night, the ringing started again. I ignored it until the vibration stopped and a message appeared. It was from Vanessa. "You think this makes you noble? You're cruel. You've ruined us. I hope you can sleep knowing that." I stared at the words for a long time before setting the phone down. Sleep came easily that night. The next morning, I woke to another email from Marcus. Attached was a short statement: "Trust protection clause successfully executed. Access restoration under review." There was also a note. "They're planning a celebration dinner this week. Vanessa's been posting about it, some kind of freedom night for their new chapter. I thought you'd want to know." I read it twice, almost laughing. They didn't know yet. The timing couldn't have been better. I wrote back, "Let them celebrate." For the next few days, I kept to my routine. Walks through the vineyards, simple meals, letters from Helen. Her words were a kind of anchor. She didn't know the details of what was happening, only that I sounded more at peace. "That's what happens," she wrote, "when we stop fighting battles that aren't worth winning." On the 5th day, Marcus called again. I could hear the faint sound of traffic behind him. "They just realized it," he said. "How bad is it?" "Complete freeze. Their personal accounts, joint credit lines, property payments, all inaccessible. The system flagged the fraudulent attempts as high risk, so it triggered a full suspension." I said nothing. He continued, "Vanessa tried calling me, but I told her I couldn't discuss trust matters without your written consent." She wasn't happy. I smiled faintly. I imagined she wasn't. "You're sure you don't want to talk to them?" he asked. "No, they'll figure it out when the bank calls." After the call, I went out to the porch with my coffee and watched the light shift across the hills. It was strange how revenge didn't feel explosive. It was quiet, methodical, like balancing an equation. The same calm precision that had built my company now dismantled their illusion of control. By evening, the messages had changed tone. "Dad, please call me. Vanessa is panicking. We can't pay rent. The card isn't working." "What's going on?" Then hours later, "You win." "Is that what you wanted, for us to beg?" I didn't reply to that one either. The next day, the texts stopped. Instead, there was silence, the kind that comes after realization. I went for a walk through the vineyard, the gravel crunching softly under my shoes. The world felt distant, serene, almost untouched by the chaos unraveling across the ocean. But I knew that somewhere in New York my son was learning what silence could do when words no longer worked. That evening I sat by the window, the last light fading from the hills. My phone buzzed once more. Another email from Marcus. Subject: media notice. I opened it. He had attached a screenshot from a local financial news outlet. A headline read, "Lawson Trust implements emergency protection clause amid fraud concerns." The article was brief, factual, impersonal. No names. Just a story about due diligence and legal safeguards. Still, it was enough. Enough for their world to start cracking. I leaned back in the chair, the wood creaking beneath me. I poured another glass of wine, the deep red, swirling like liquid sunset. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was reacting to life. I was directing it. When I looked at my phone again, there were no new messages. Not from Ethan. Not from Vanessa. Only silence. I stood and stepped outside. The air was cool, smelling faintly of rain that hadn't come yet. I looked out over the valley at the lines of vines stretching endlessly toward the horizon. Helen's words echoed in my mind. Sometimes stepping back isn't surrender, it's strategy. She was right. I took a long breath and whispered into the evening air, "You wanted freedom, Vanessa. Now you have it." The wind shifted, carrying the sound of church bells from somewhere far away. The sun was gone now, and the first stars had begun to appear, faint but determined. I stayed there until the night swallowed the last of the light, my phone silent beside me, the hills dark and patient. The game was no longer mine to play. I had already won by not moving another inch. The first report came through Marcus early in the morning. He sent me a link to a financial news update with a short message, "It's starting." I clicked the article. The headline read, "Lawson family faces financial lockdown following trust suspension." Below it were a few brief paragraphs describing a temporary asset freeze under the name of a family-owned trust. No personal names, just enough detail for anyone who knew us to fill in the blanks. By noon, the story had already spread through business circles in New York. I didn't need to check social media to know Vanessa was panicking. I could feel it. She had built her entire identity around appearances, networking events, dinner parties, Freedom Night celebrations that she posted online for validation. And now suddenly, she couldn't even pay for her own meal. I made myself another coffee and sat by the open window. The light in Tuscany was different that day, muted, distant, like it was watching everything unfold from far away. By late afternoon, my phone started buzzing again. Dozens of messages. Ethan's name appeared over and over. "Dad, please call me. You have to undo this. Vanessa can't stop crying. Please, we can't pay anything." And then the one that made me pause, "Oliver is scared." For a second, I almost replied. My thumb hovered over the screen. But I stopped myself. Not yet. Marcus called later that evening. "They've hit the panic phase," he said. "Vanessa tried contacting the bank directly, but the fraud alert made it impossible. She's also been calling my office. I told my assistant to say we can't discuss the trust without your written consent." "You did the right thing," I said quietly. He hesitated. "Do you want to know what they're saying online?" "No." He chuckled. "Good, it's better that way." I thanked him and ended the call. Outside, the hills were glowing orange from the setting sun. I thought of the years I'd spent worrying about protecting my family from the world. Now I realized the danger had been inside the house all along. That night, I poured myself a small glass of whiskey and sat on the porch. The phone buzzed one last time. A text from Vanessa. "You're destroying your own son. You think this is justice? You're just proving you're as cruel as everyone said you were." I let the screen go dark. I didn't need her words to tell me who I was. I already knew. The next morning, the storm broke publicly. A gossip column had picked up the story speculating about a family power struggle involving inheritance mismanagement. It was the kind of headline that gets clicks, the kind that spreads fast among people who love to see success crumble. Vanessa must have realized how quickly things were spiraling, because around noon, a video appeared on her social media account. I didn't watch it, but Marcus later told me she had recorded herself crying, talking about betrayal and emotional abuse. The comments section filled with both sympathy and suspicion. She had always been a master at playing victim, but this time the performance fell flat. By evening, she deleted her account. Ethan's messages grew more desperate. "Dad, please answer. We need to talk. It's not just the money. The company's board saw the news. I might lose my position." Still, I stayed silent. Silence was my language now. I turned on the small TV in the house that night, not to watch the news, but to drown out the sound of my conscience whispering. I switched between Italian talk shows, understanding only fragments, until I found an old Western movie. A man alone against his town, standing his ground without saying a word. It was strangely comforting. Later, I received an unexpected email. The sender's name was Amy Chen. "Mr. Lawson," it began, "my name is Amy. I'm a journalist writing a feature on generational legacies and family business conflicts. Your story has been circulating widely, though most of it is speculation. I'd like to talk to you not for gossip, but to understand what happens when loyalty and control collide. Please consider giving your perspective." I read her message twice, then deleted it. The last thing I wanted was attention. But I underestimated how stories have lives of their own. Within 2 days, Amy published an article titled "The Quiet Retaliation of Richard Lawson." I didn't give her a single quote, but she pieced it together from public records, old company documents, and whispers from former employees. She wrote about a man who built an empire with patience, who trusted too long, and who in the end reclaimed his peace without raising his voice. The article went viral. People shared it under captions like "Dignity still exists" and "Justice without shouting." I should have been angry at the intrusion, but I wasn't. For the first time, someone had told the story without twisting it. That same night, Marcus called again. "You've become a folk hero," he said, laughing softly. "Even my mother called me to say she read about the silent father." I sighed. I didn't want fame, Marcus. I know. But sometimes the truth finds its way to the surface, whether we like it or not. He paused. Vanessa's PR firm dropped her. She's toxic now. Ethan, still trying to clean the mess. But the board knows he authorized a fraudulent request. Even if Vanessa pushed him, he signed it. That's enough to ruin him professionally. I rubbed my temple, staring at the darkening sky. He'll blame me for this. Marcus's tone softened. Maybe. But someday he'll realize you didn't destroy him. You just stopped saving him. After we hung up, I walked outside. The vineyard was quiet, only the faint sound of crickets and the distant bark of a dog. The moon hung low over the hills, pale and full. I sat on the steps, letting the cool air touch my face. The phone lay beside me, silent now. For once, the silence didn't hurt. It was the sound of balance being restored. The next day, Helen called. "You sound different again," she said. "Like a man who's finally stopped looking over his shoulder." "I guess I'm learning," I said. She laughed softly. "Learning what? That silence doesn't just punish. It teaches." She was quiet for a moment. "Be careful with that lesson. Too much silence can also build walls." "I'll keep a door open," I promised. "Good," she said, "because someday someone will knock." After the call, I sat for a while thinking about her words. Maybe she was right. Maybe I had built more walls than I realized. But for now, they were the only things keeping me upright. The world outside my little stone house kept spinning news cycles, speculation, people talking about justice as if it were entertainment. I stayed still. I tended the small garden Carlo had left behind. I watched the vines shift color as autumn crept closer. And every evening when the sun dipped behind the hills, I would sit with my coffee and think of Ethan, not as the man who betrayed me, but as the boy who once built paper airplanes at the kitchen table. The boy who used to laugh when they crashed and say, "We'll build a better one next time." I wondered if he remembered that. Then I looked out at the sky where stars were beginning to appear one by one, and I thought, he will. Someday. But not yet. The morning air in Tuscany felt heavier that day, the kind that carries the weight of news even before it arrives. I woke up to another email from Marcus. "Brace yourself," it said. Attached was a link to a major American outlet. The headline read, "The Silent Father Who Outsmarted His Greedy Family." My name wasn't in the title, but everyone who knew the story would recognize it instantly. Amy Chen had gone national. Her article had been picked up by syndicates, translated, quoted, discussed on podcasts. She described me as a man of quiet conviction, betrayed by those closest to him, who found justice through patience instead of anger. It was strange seeing my life turned into moral commentary. People online were debating whether I was a hero or just another stubborn old man teaching his family a cruel lesson. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat by the window. The hills glowed under the early sun, the vines stretching toward the horizon. The world looked peaceful, even as mine was being dissected on screens across an ocean. By noon, Marcus called. "You're trending," he said. "People love the idea of poetic revenge. They're quoting that article like scripture." "I didn't ask for that," I said quietly. "I know. But maybe this is the universe's way of giving you the last word." I didn't answer. The truth was, I didn't want the last word. I just wanted silence again. A few hours later, another call came through, this time from a number I hadn't seen in months. It was Linda. "Richard," she said softly, her voice hesitant. "You've made quite the storm. I didn't make anything. I just stopped cleaning up after everyone else." She sighed. "Vanessa's been calling me. She's falling apart. Ethan won't talk to anyone. He's lost his job, Richard. The board asked him to step down after the story broke." I closed my eyes. "He'll survive?" He's smart. He'll figure it out. He's angry, she continued. He says you wanted this to happen. I didn't want any of it, I said. But I stopped protecting him from consequences. Linda's voice trembled. Do you ever wonder if you went too far? All the time, I admitted. But then I remember who pushed first. We were both silent for a while, the sound of her breath faint on the line. Finally, she said, he needs time. So do I said, and ended the call gently. That night, I walked into the village square. People there had started recognizing me as Il Signore Silenzioso, the quiet gentleman. The local baker gave me an extra loaf of bread and winked as if I had done something noble. I thanked him, but said nothing. The truth was, nobility had little to do with what I had done. It was calculation pure and simple. I had spent my life solving problems with logic. This had been no different. The next morning, Helen called. Her voice was calm, warm, grounding. I saw the article, she said. You're famous now. Not the kind of fame I ever wanted. I know. But maybe fame isn't the point. Maybe it's about closure. I smiled faintly. Closure is overrated. People just rename pain when it finally stops screaming. She didn't argue. Still, you sound steadier. Maybe I am, I said. The noise is finally happening somewhere else. That afternoon, another message from Marcus appeared. Ethan and Vanessa have filed a formal appeal against the trust suspension. They're accusing you of emotional manipulation and financial coercion. It won't hold up legally, but it will make noise. Let it, I replied. The more they talk, the clearer they make their motives. He sent a thumbs-up emoji, an odd choice for Marcus, who usually avoided emotion altogether. It made me smile. Later that day, I found myself reading Amy Chen's follow-up article. She wrote about the wave of public reactions, how people were reflecting on their own families, how betrayal often hides behind love. She ended with a single line that struck me. Sometimes silence is not absence. It's judgment delivered without cruelty. For the first time, I felt something close to understanding. Maybe that was what I had been seeking all along, not revenge, but recognition. The quiet acknowledgement that I had been right, that I had not deserved the humiliation of being cast out. Still, I couldn't pretend it didn't hurt to think of Ethan as the villain in other people's eyes. He was my son. For all his pride and foolishness, he was still the boy who once built paper airplanes with me, the one who laughed when they crashed. I wanted to believe there was still some of that boy left. In the evening, I sat on the porch, watching the sun fade. The phone buzzed again this time, with a message from an unknown number. It was a photo Oliver at school holding a small certificate. The caption read, "He says he misses you." There was no name attached, but I knew Linda had sent it. I stared at the photo for a long time. The boy had grown taller. His smile was the same, though wide and a little uneven. I could almost hear his voice asking if I was okay. I typed a message back, "Tell him I'm proud of him," but never sent it. Some things were better left unsaid. A week later, Amy Chen's story reached television. A talk show host called it the perfect modern fable about respect and consequence. Another commentator said I represented a dying generation that values dignity over forgiveness. They were both wrong and both a little right. Meanwhile, Vanessa's world collapsed further. Her former colleagues started leaking details about her manipulative tactics at work. Someone online found old social media posts mocking old-fashioned men. The internet did what it always does. It chewed through her reputation without mercy. Ethan, by contrast, disappeared. His accounts went private. He withdrew from friends and stopped responding to messages. Marcus said his company shares had been sold to cover legal fees. I imagined him sitting in that same Seattle house, the one I might help build, wondering where it all went wrong. One evening, Helen called again. "You've been quiet lately," she said. "Isn't that what I'm known for?" "Too quiet," she said. "The kind that sounds like loneliness, not peace." I hesitated. "Maybe both. Then it's time to come home for a while," she said gently. "Even solitude needs witnesses." The words stayed with me long after we hung up. I realized that while I had won, victory didn't taste the way I imagined. It wasn't sweet. It was heavy, like old wine that had been left open too long. That night I walked outside. The hills shimmered under moonlight. I stood there, letting the wind move through the cypress trees. Somewhere far away, a bell tower rang, echoing through the valley. I thought of Ethan, of Oliver, of Linda's voice trembling with guilt. For the first time, I wondered if silence could forgive as easily as it punished. The next morning, I packed a small bag and called Helen. "I think I'll take you up on that offer," I said. "I'll be here," she replied. And for the first time in months, I felt ready to leave Tuscany, not to escape, but to return to something that might still be worth mending. Linda arrived in Florence on a rainy afternoon. I saw her through the window of the small cafe where we had agreed to meet. She stood by the doorway for a moment, scanning the room, hesitant but determined. When our eyes met, she gave a faint smile that carried both warmth and regret. She looked older than I remembered, though I suppose I did too. Time had softened her edges, but there was still a quiet strength about her, the same kind that once made me fall in love with her. She approached the table slowly, holding a folded umbrella, her coat damp from the rain. "Richard," she said softly, sitting down across from me. "Linda," I replied. "It's been a long time." She nodded, brushing a strand of wet hair from her forehead. "Too long." The waiter brought us coffee, and for a while neither of us spoke. The sound of rain against the windows filled the silence between us. It wasn't awkward. It was the silence of two people who knew each other's histories too well to rush the present. "I read the articles," she said finally. "About you. About the trust. About Ethan. I figured you might," I said. "You've become something of a symbol, you know. The stoic father who refuses to bend." I gave a small, tired smile. Symbols are easier to understand than people. She studied me for a long time. "Did you really have to go that far?" "I didn't go far enough," I said. "Not until they forced my hand." She looked down at her cup, tracing the rim with her finger. "Vanessa's gone," she said after a pause. "She left a few weeks ago, packed her things, took what she could, and walked out. Ethan didn't even try to stop her. I didn't react. I'm not surprised." "He's falling apart," she continued. "The job, the money, the house, he's losing everything." I leaned back in my chair. "He's losing illusions, not everything." Linda's voice grew quiet. "He said something the other night that broke me. He said you never loved him, that you only loved control, that everything you did was about power, not family." The words lingered in the air between us. I took a slow breath. When I was building my company, every decision I made was about survival. I thought that's what love looked like: protection, order, responsibility. Maybe I never learned how to show anything else. She reached across the table, her hand resting over mine. It was a small gesture, but it carried decades of unfinished forgiveness. "You tried your best, Richard." We all did. But somewhere along the way, we stopped seeing each other as people and started seeing each other as problems to fix. The rain grew heavier, turning the streets outside into moving mirrors. "I used to blame you," she said, "for being cold, for putting work before us. But now I see it wasn't about work. It was about fear. You were always afraid of losing what you built. I didn't deny it. And you were afraid I'd forget you in the process." Her eyes softened. Maybe we were both right. We sat in silence for a while, the kind that didn't hurt anymore. After a while, she said, "Ethan needs to hear from you. Not the man the papers talk about, his father." "He wouldn't listen," I said. "Maybe not. But he needs to know you're still there." I shook my head. "I don't want to call him out of pity." "It wouldn't be pity," she said gently. "It would be grace." The word lingered. I hadn't heard it in years. I took a sip of my coffee, now cold, and looked out the window. People hurried past under umbrellas, unaware of the small reckoning happening inside. "You know what's strange?" I said. "After all this, I don't even hate Vanessa. She only did what she knew, take, climb, survive. But Ethan, I thought I raised him better." Linda smiled sadly. "You raised him to be strong. He just learned the wrong definition of it." Her words cut through me with a kind of clarity I hadn't expected. For the first time, I felt the sharp edges of my own pride. When the rain began to ease, we decided to walk. The streets of Florence glistened under the streetlights, and the air smelled of wet stone and espresso. We walked side by side, not touching, but close enough to feel each other's presence. "I didn't come here to defend him," Linda said, as we crossed the bridge over the Arno. "I came because I needed to see you. I needed to remember who we were before all of this." I nodded. "Before everything became a transaction." She stopped walking and turned to face me. "He'll come around, Richard. Maybe not soon, maybe not in the way you want, but he will. You're still his father. And what if he doesn't? Then at least you'll know you didn't let bitterness finish what pride started." I looked at her, then really looked at her. The woman who had once shared my dreams, my disappointments, and now, after so many years, my regrets. "You always did know how to make things sound simple." She smiled faintly. "That's because I finally learned to stop complicating them." We walked a bit more before stopping at the edge of a small piazza. The rain had stopped completely, and the lights reflected off the cobblestones like stars trapped underfoot. She turned to me once more. "You don't have to forgive him today. But don't close the door all the way, Richard. Leave it unlocked." I didn't promise, but I didn't argue either. When we reached her hotel, she stood on the steps, hesitant to say goodbye. "I'm glad you're still the same man I married," she said quietly. "Just a little less sure of everything." "Uncertainty suits me," I said. "It makes silence easier." She laughed softly. "Take care of yourself, and when you're ready, call him." "I will." I said, though neither of us knew when. She touched my arm lightly before turning to go inside. I watched her disappear into the warm light of the lobby, then turned back toward the empty street. The rain had started again, a soft drizzle that kissed the stone beneath my feet. I walked without direction past cafes closing for the night, past the quiet rhythm of the river. I thought about Linda's words, about grace, about the difference between revenge and redemption. Somewhere deep down, I knew she was right. The fight was over. But the silence that followed wasn't victory anymore. It was the space where forgiveness might grow, if I ever found the courage to plant it. Helen's birthday fell on a crisp October evening, the kind where the air smelled of wood smoke and old wine. She invited a few friends from the bookshop, most of them teachers, poets, or travelers who had somehow ended up staying in Florence longer than they planned. The small courtyard behind her store was lit with strings of yellow bulbs, and laughter spilled out like warm light. I arrived early, carrying a bottle of Chianti and a single sunflower wrapped in brown paper. When she saw me, she grinned. "You remembered?" "I try not to forget the few good habits I still have," I said. She took the flower, brushing her fingers against mine for a moment longer than necessary. "You look better," she said. "Less like a man trying to outstare his ghosts." Maybe I'm just getting used to living with them, I said. She tilted her head. Or maybe you've learned that ghosts stop haunting you once you stop running. I smiled. You always did sound like one of your novels. The party was small but warm. People told stories, sang off-key Italian songs, and passed around slices of lemon cake. For the first time in years, I felt myself laugh without thinking. Helen moved among her guests with the easy grace of someone who knew how to make strangers feel like family. When most of the guests had left, she brought out 2 glasses and the last of the wine. We sat beneath the hanging lights, their glow soft against her face. The night was still, except for the faint hum of traffic beyond the alley. "Are you planning to go back to the States?" she asked suddenly. "I don't know," I said. "The idea of home doesn't feel the same anymore." She studied me for a moment. "You can't hide here forever, Richard. Tuscany is beautiful, but it's not meant for running away. It's meant for starting again." "Maybe I don't want to start again," I said quietly. "Maybe I just want to stop ending." Helen smiled sadly. "You always did have a talent for turning peace into punishment." I looked down at my glass. "They filed a lawsuit against me, you know. Ethan and Vanessa. Claimed I manipulated them financially." Her expression didn't change. "And what did you do?" "I let Marcus handle it. The court threw it out in minutes. The trust is airtight." "And how did that feel?" I hesitated. "Like watching a fire burn out after a storm. Quiet but final." She leaned back, looking up at the lights. "You could reach out, you know, to Ethan. Maybe not to fix it, but to stop it from hardening completely." "He wouldn't listen," I said. "He's too much like me, and he still thinks I did this to humiliate him." Helen turned her head to me. "Then don't say it with words. Just show him that the door's still open." I didn't answer. The silence stretched between us, filled only by the sound of the wind through the vines. She finally said, "I think forgiveness isn't about who deserves it. It's about who's tired of carrying the weight." I looked at her, wondering if she was speaking about me or about herself. Later, after she had gone inside to clean up, I stepped out into the street. The city was quiet, the cobblestones slick from a brief drizzle. I walked aimlessly for a while, passing shuttered shops and sleeping cats. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was an email from Marcus. "Ethan filed a formal complaint this morning. He's trying to reopen the trust on the grounds of emotional coercion. Don't worry, it won't go anywhere. I'll handle it." I typed back, "Do whatever you need to do." An hour later, he called. "You'll like this part," he said, his tone half amused. "Vanessa tried sending an anonymous letter to the court claiming you faked documents. She signed it with a fake name, but the email trace came from her office account. The judge threw it out immediately." I rubbed my temple. "And Ethan?" He looked blindsided when the judge questioned him. You could see it, he finally realized how far she'd dragged him. "Will there be consequences?" I asked. "Legal ones, yes. But the real ones are emotional. He'll have to live with what he let her do." I sat down on a bench near the river. The Arno shimmered in the moonlight, calm and endless. "Then it's done," I said. Marcus hesitated. "It's done legally, sure. But these things never end cleanly, Richard. You'll have to decide what kind of ending you want." "I think I already did," I said, and hung up. The next morning, Helen found me sitting at her shop's counter, half asleep with a cup of espresso. "You look like you've been thinking all night," she said. "I have," I admitted. "I keep wondering whether revenge always leaves you lonelier than before." She handed me a croissant and said, "It depends on whether you mistake justice for loneliness." I smiled faintly. "You always know how to make simple things sound profound." "That's because you make simple things complicated." We shared a quiet breakfast. Outside, the city stirred awake the shopkeepers opening doors. The smell of coffee spreading through the street, the sound of bicycles rattling over cobblestones. It felt like the world had exhaled after holding its breath. Later that afternoon, I received another email from Marcus attaching the final court summary. Case dismissed. No appeal possible. I read it twice and closed my laptop. The relief didn't come as I expected. It wasn't triumphant. It was like setting down a heavy bag I had carried too long without realizing it. Helen found me again in the garden that evening. "You look lighter," she said. "Maybe I finally ran out of anger." "Good," she said softly. "Now you have room for something else. Like what? Peace, maybe. Or something that looks like it." We sat there in silence for a while, listening to the wind brushing through the olive trees. The sun was dipping behind the rooftops, painting everything in amber. "Do you think Ethan hates me?" I asked quietly. Helen considered it. "No. I think he hates himself for choosing the wrong side. But hate fades. Regret lingers longer, and regret can turn into something softer if you let it." I stared at the horizon, my voice low. "He hasn't reached out?" "He will," she said. "Not because he's ready, but because silence becomes unbearable when you know you've hurt someone who never yelled back." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. When the sky turned dark, Helen reached for my hand. Her grip was steady, warm. "You can let go now, Richard," she said. "You've already won. You don't have to keep holding the victory." I nodded slowly. "Maybe tomorrow." She smiled. "Tomorrow is a good place to start." That night, I walked home alone. The streets were quiet, the smell of rain rising from the stones. The sound of my footsteps echoed softly in the narrow alleys. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was walking away from something. I was walking toward it, whatever it might be. Central Park was still wet from an early spring shower when I returned to New York. The city smelled of rain and exhaust, familiar and restless. I hadn't planned on stopping there that morning, but as the cab rolled past the east gate, something made me ask the driver to pull over. Maybe I wanted to see what home felt like after all this time. The park was quiet except for the distant hum of traffic and the soft chatter of sparrows in the trees. I walked slowly, my shoes pressing into the damp gravel path, breathing in the air that somehow tasted like memory. I passed joggers, a woman walking her dog, a street musician tuning his guitar. Everything was alive, moving forward, as if nothing had ever paused. I stopped near the pond where children were floating toy sailboats. One of them had hair the color of burnt honey standing a little apart from the others. My heart caught before my mind did. Oliver. He was taller now, his face sharper, but the way he squinted in the sunlight was exactly the same. He saw me before I could decide whether to approach. His eyes widened. He hesitated for a heartbeat, then smiled a small, uncertain smile that hit me harder than any words could. "Grandpa," he said, running toward me. I knelt without thinking, and when his arms wrapped around my shoulders, something inside me broke loose. The boy smelled like soap and wind. I closed my eyes, holding on a second longer than I probably should have. "I didn't know you were here," he said breathlessly. "I didn't know I'd be either," I replied. "Guess I just missed walking." He grinned, shy but proud. "Mom says you live in Italy now." "Something like that," I said. "It's quieter there." He looked at me carefully. "Do you miss us?" I smiled, though my chest tightened. "Every day." He nodded as if he'd expected that answer. "Dad's been sad," he said quietly. "He doesn't talk much anymore. Sometimes he sits in the living room and stares at the phone." The words felt heavy coming from him. "Does he still work?" I asked. "He's trying, but he doesn't smile a lot." I looked out across the pond. The water rippled with the breeze, carrying the reflection of the gray sky. "Your dad's figuring things out," I said. "It takes time." Oliver studied me, then reached into his backpack. He pulled out a small, wrinkled piece of paper, an old photo of the two of us sitting on the porch, holding the model airplane we built years ago. The edges were worn, the ink fading. "I kept it," he said, "even when Mom said to throw it away." My throat tightened. "That's a good photo," I said softly. "We made a fine plane, didn't we?" He nodded proudly. "It's still in my room." Before I could answer, a voice called his name. I turned and saw Ethan standing a few yards away. He looked thinner than I remembered, paler, like someone who hadn't been sleeping well. He froze when he saw me. For a long moment, none of us moved. Oliver looked from me to his father, sensing the air between us. "Dad," he said quietly, "Grandpa's here." Ethan didn't speak. He just nodded once, his jaw tight. Then he said to Oliver, "Why don't you go buy some ice cream? I'll meet you by the bench." Oliver looked uncertain, then handed me the photo. "Keep it," he said. "You might need it." When he ran off, the park fell silent again, except for the distant hum of the city. Ethan took a few steps closer, his hands buried deep in his pockets. "I didn't expect to see you," he said. "Neither did I." He nodded slowly. His voice was rough, quieter than I remembered. "You look different." "So do you." He gave a short, humorless laugh. "Yeah, well, life has a way of doing that." We stood there in silence for a while. I didn't know how to start. Finally, he said, "I guess you know everything. About Vanessa, the money, the house." "I heard," I said. "She's gone. Took what was left of her pride and disappeared. I don't even blame her anymore. Maybe she was just smarter than me." I shook my head. "She wasn't smarter, just louder." He looked away, swallowing hard. "I thought I was protecting her, from you. From the way you used to make me feel like I was never enough." The words stung, but I let him say them. "I thought if I stood my ground, you'd finally respect me," he continued. "But all I did was burn the bridge we had left." I took a slow breath. "Respect isn't something you demand, Ethan. It's something you live up to. I wanted you to learn that on your own, not by losing everything." His voice cracked. "Well, congratulations. Lesson learned." The anger in his tone wasn't for me, it was for himself. I took a step closer. "I didn't freeze the accounts to destroy you. I did it because you gave the keys to someone who only cared about herself. You didn't lose money, Ethan. You lost trust. And trust is harder to rebuild." He ran a hand through his hair, eyes glistening. "I know. God, I know. I keep thinking about that night, what I said to you, what I let her say to you. I was so sure I was doing the right thing." "You were angry," I said. "Pride makes men deaf." He nodded. "I've been deaf a long time." We both fell quiet. A jogger passed by, the sound of her shoes fading into the distance. The world around us went on oblivious to the small miracle happening in the middle of it. Finally, Ethan said, "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even know if I deserve it." "It's not about deserving," I said. "It's about not carrying the weight forever. We can both stop now." He looked at me, then really looked, and something in his face softened. "You're not angry anymore?" I shook my head. "No. I'm tired of being angry." He took a shaky breath. "I'm sorry, Dad." The words hung there, fragile and unsteady, but real. I felt them land somewhere deep inside where all the old wounds lived. "I know," I said quietly. "That's enough." Oliver came running back, 2 melting ice creams in hand. "I got one for you too, Grandpa," he said proudly. I smiled. "Thank you, buddy." Ethan watched us, his eyes wet, his expression unreadable. Then he said softly, "Do you want to join us for lunch? There's a place nearby, nothing fancy." I hesitated. Then I nodded. "I'd like that." We walked together slowly, the three of us. The city noise swelled around us, but for once, it didn't feel harsh. It felt like life again. As we crossed the park's exit, Oliver reached for both our hands. His small fingers wrapped around ours, bridging a gap that had taken years to close. Ethan looked at me and managed a faint, grateful smile. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like a ghost passing through my own family's story. I felt human again, flawed, forgiven, still learning how to begin. A year later, the ocean looked different to me. The waves along the Oregon coast rolled in slowly, patient and deliberate, like time itself had softened. I stood on the porch of the small house Helen and I now shared, the wind carrying the scent of salt and pine. It wasn't Tuscany's golden silence or Seattle's gray bustle. It was something in between, steady, forgiving. Inside, Helen was sorting through letters for the new foundation. She had named it Lawson Foundation for Responsible Families. I hadn't wanted my name on it, but she insisted. "You earned it," she said. "And maybe one day, Ethan will understand why." We had built the foundation together, starting small. It helped retirees, widowers, and parents protect their assets from exploitation. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about dignity. Every time someone thanked me, I saw a glimpse of the man I used to be, the one who believed in doing things right, even when no one noticed. That morning, a letter came from Ethan. The handwriting was careful, almost formal. Inside was a photo of him and Oliver standing outside a small community center. The note was brief. "Dad, Oliver and I started volunteering here on weekends. He helps with tutoring, and I've been managing some of their finances. We're doing better. Thank you for the foundation. It's helping people who need it, including me. Hope you and Helen are well. E." I held the letter for a long time. No apologies, no promises, just quiet understanding. It was enough. Helen read it too, smiling softly. "See," she said, "even the stubborn ones can change when you stop shouting at them." I laughed, folding the paper neatly. "You'd make a fine philosopher, Helen." "I already am," she said. "You just didn't notice before." That afternoon, Amy Chen called. She wanted to do a follow-up piece on the foundation, focusing on what she called the legacy of silence. I told her she could, but only if she promised to write about the people we helped, not me. "You can't hide forever," she said with a smile in her voice. "I'm not hiding," I replied. "I'm just finished performing." When the article was published, it carried the title, "The Man Who Stayed Silent and Then Spoke Through His Work." It was kind, balanced, even hopeful. For once, I didn't feel exposed. I felt seen. Later that evening, Helen and I drove down to the shoreline. The sky was painted with streaks of pink and gold, and the sound of the waves reminded me of the nights I used to lie awake wondering how everything had gone wrong. Now the same sound felt like closure. "Do you ever think about starting over somewhere new?" Helen asked, her eyes on the horizon. I shook my head. "No. I think for the first time I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." She leaned against me. "You always were. You just took the long way around to find it." We stood there as the sun dipped below the water, leaving behind a thin silver line that shimmered until it vanished completely. The world was quiet, but not empty. It was the kind of quiet that carries meaning, the kind that follows understanding, not anger. A few months later, the foundation held its first community event. Ethan came with Oliver. Seeing him walk through the doors felt like watching a reflection step into the light. We shook hands, then hugged stiffly at first, but long enough to remember what it felt like to be family. Helen watched from across the room, smiling. Oliver ran up to me holding a small wooden model plane. "Dad helped me make it," he said proudly. I took it carefully, feeling the smooth wood beneath my fingers. "Looks like it could really fly," I said. "It can," Oliver said, his voice bright. "We tested it yesterday." Ethan met my eyes and gave a small nod. No words needed. The gesture was enough. That night, after everyone had left, Helen and I walked through the quiet hall where the event had been held. The banner with the foundation's name swayed gently above the empty chairs. "It's funny," she said. "All those years you chased control, and when you finally let go, everything fell into place." I smiled. Maybe letting go was the control I needed all along. When we got home, I poured us each a glass of wine. The house was filled with the soft sound of waves outside and the faint hum of the old radio Helen liked to keep on. She flipped through one of her poetry books and read aloud, "Forgiveness is not forgetting. It's remembering without fear." "That one's yours," I said. She looked up surprised. "What do you mean you've been living it since the day I showed up at your bookstore?" She laughed softly, closing the book. "Maybe that's why you found me again." "Maybe," I said. Later, after she'd gone to bed, I stepped outside. The night air was cool, the stars stretched wide above the ocean. I stood there thinking about the long road from the night I left my son's house to this quiet peace. Every mile, every silence, every decision, it all led here. I didn't regret the path, though it was hard. The pain had burned away everything false, until only truth was left. The truth that respect isn't demanded, it's earned. That control isn't strength, it's fear disguised as love. And that sometimes silence can be louder than forgiveness. The wind carried the faint sound of laughter from inside the house. I smiled. Somewhere in the distance, a gull cried out, circling above the water, before disappearing into the dark. I thought of Ethan, of Oliver, of the small legacy we had rebuilt, not in wealth, but in understanding. I raised my glass toward the sea. "To second chances," I whispered, "and to learning how to listen." The waves answered soft and endless. And if you've ever been told you were wrong for walking away, remember this: sometimes stepping back isn't giving up. It's choosing peace over pride, dignity over noise, wisdom over anger. Because silence, when it's chosen, isn't weakness. It's power finally finding its right place. If this story reminded you of someone you love or someone you've lost, take a moment before you go. Leave a thought below, share what silence taught you, and stay with us for the next story. Sometimes the quietest voices still have the most to say.